Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of Women Appreciation Month, looking at WEYES Blood. This is an artist who I have known about, sort of been on the periphery of my musical information, but I don't think I've ever actually listened to a song by them. So that changes today. We're going to be checking out a track from them called Movies that came out a few years ago. Well, at least the music video did. Let's dive into this and see what WEYES Blood is bringing to the table today. So we have this shifting arpeggio going on. It changes with the chord progression.
This is how it feels to be in love. This is life from above. There's no books anymore. I'm bound to that summer big box office hit, making love to a counterfeit.
The uplift at the end of that vocal line is interesting. Yeah, the chord progression is rather somber. The expansive arpeggiation implies possibility, but the chord progression and the vocal melody don't. So it's interesting to hear that uptick there, where I expected more of a downer at the end.
Some people feel what some people don't.
Great pacing on this too, with the vocal layering, adding the harmony and now removing it, bringing the intensity back down.
Life doesn't seem to shine like that screen. Put me in a movie and everyone will know.
Those fun half-step tension rises.
You'll be the star you know you are. The movies I watched when I was a kid, the hopes and the dreams don't give credit to the real things I know the meaning, I know the story, I know the glory.
Interesting decision to put that chirping instrument back there. It's an interesting combination of like a rounded timbre and a piercing one. Okay. The digitization on the background vocals providing the little rhythmic idea. I like that.
I wanna be
anticipation of change, even though not much has altered. Almost like a shift in perspective, more so than a literal alteration. Yeah, and then this. Yeah, a bit of like a Baroque adjacent movement there between the bass synthesizer pad and the violin. Very interesting. All right, so to me, this is definitely a work of art that focuses more on the emotional side of things. There are some elements of complexity in here, but to me, like I mentioned, a lot of it isn't really about individual aspects as much as how it all comes together as a whole to create something evocative and artistic. And I think that we can see a strong juxtaposition of what the first, I don't know, 3.5 minutes is entirely based off of in the opening of this track. We have that synth arpeggio. An arpeggio is just it's a series of notes that sort of outline a chord or a key. It's your root, your third, your fifth, and your octave, which is just your root but higher. And this shifts with the chord progression. So it might be, these notes, I guess it'd be four notes here, here in this chord, and then when we move to the next chord, it rises up. They're still the same distance between each other, but, the pitches themselves have changed in order to move along with the chord progression. We actually have a double stack here. It's a 2-octave arpeggio, which would be the root, third, fifth, octave, third, fifth, next octave up. And then it comes back down the same way. And this is pervasive through the entirety of the song. Now, the nice thing about an arpeggio is stability. Your fifth and your octave are going to be your most stable notes in any chord. And the third is just a really nice addition to it, also providing a bit of stability while bringing in a bit of spice and character. It helps define the feeling of the chord a little bit more. But then we also have the expansiveness of it. It's not just 1 octave, it's 2. It feels like it rises so much before it comes back down. It feels like it crosses so much space. And honestly, it does. We're talking about, I don't know, 6 to 7 notes. It's 2 octaves in just a few notes. It's honestly kind of vast of a sound. It feels like potential. That's what did I call it at the beginning of the reaction? I don't think I called it potential. I said that it was opportunity, I think was the word that I used particularly there. But I like the word potential more right now that I'm thinking about this. It feels like it can do anything. It can go anywhere. It also feels very optimistic. It feels positive in energy. In the beginning of the song, I honestly thought we were going to go for something a bit kind of sugary sweet as far as emotion and atmosphere are concerned, particularly because of this one synth pad. But the vocals come in and they kind of oppose this a bit. There's a melancholy to it, a wistfulness, a wanting of something else. I didn't know how to reconcile these two at the beginning. How can this song represent potential and a wanting of more? And originally, I had assumed that it was wanting to fulfill one's potential. I still think that that might be a read on it, but by the end of the track, especially once we got into the second half, which we'll dive into in a second, what I think that represents, I came to a different conclusion here with this sound, and it's actually missed potential. Or I should say, an impossibility of wanting. Having the arpeggiation be what somebody wants their life to be like, and then the vocals representing what their life is. Or it could be a situation, it could be, any number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be, an entirety of life. It could be a very specific moment in time. This is how I wanted things to go, this is how I envisioned it, but this was the reality. And I think that's what the push and pull is supposed to be there. What makes it bittersweet is an understanding of how things could have gone and an appreciation of how they went. And that actually ties a little bit into my understanding of the vocal movement. As I mentioned, there's like a melancholy, a wistfulness in the vocal melody. At the end of the first phrase of the vocals, I think this was the end of bar 8, I was actually expecting the line to actually dip down a little bit and to kind of bring more of that sorrow into the feeling of the song, but instead it provides optimism. There's an upturn into positivity at the end of it. This actually lines up a bit more with the expansive arpeggiation and made me wonder if I had a wrong read on the song after all. It's little things like this that constantly had me second guessing my interpretation of the track, what it was trying to say. More importantly, maybe what I was getting out of it. But as usual, you can't tell a story, you can't understand a story just by a single statement, a single punctuating idea. You can't look through a whole novel, see one period at the end of a sentence and be like, oh, this is a book that's all matter of factly stated. That's not how it works. So, at that point, it did have me altering my perspective on things, but I continued to evaluate the song and seeing how it went and where it moved. And I just thought it was really interesting that despite adding more layers, more vocal layers, more instruments to the mix, all that ever did was continue to, I suppose, complicate this relationship between this expansive positivity and this sort of melancholic dreariness. And the tension between the two just continued to rise through all of this expansive writing, continuing to add more layers to it. And then something interesting happens. The back half of the track, we swap out the arpeggiation on the synth pad for a violin. And we have a drum beat come in. And this was mind-boggling because this whole song I have felt in a rather slow 4/4. And the drum beat comes in and it's a faster 3 pulse. It completely changed my perspective on the track. Now, the violin doesn't stick around for too long. It's a nice bit of foreshadowing. We'll see the violin come in for other parts later, but the arpeggiation gets tossed back to the synthesizer. But we have more parts come in, and this is a joyful section of the track, a bit more optimistic. Many of the same layers, many of the same instruments, many of the same ideas, but just turned a little bit. Everything kind of pushing for more of a positive atmosphere The vocal melody. I don't know if there's been a key change. I don't know if there's just a couple of different note choices. This was flat, now we've bumped it up to a neutral, and that brings up the overall emotion of the track, of the section or something like that going on there. Regardless, even the vocal part comes off a bit more optimistic, a bit more joyful. There is still, I think, a level of longing present in this, but the optimism of that arpeggiation has begun to infect the entire track. Every instrument, every layer, everything outside of that arpeggio is more positive. It's more optimistic. It's more hopeful than it has been previously. And I really love this. This is something that I've done in some of my past works too, is a type of recontextualization, taking a melody that you've written and just putting it in a new context. You don't actually change too many of the notes in the melody itself, but by putting it in a different chord progression, putting it with different timbres, you're going to change the emotional feeling and emotional weight of that melody. And I think that's what happens here. There's a lot of small tweaks here that drastically alter the feeling of this section. Everything feels familiar, it just doesn't feel as weighty anymore. It feels positive, it feels hopeful, it feels optimistic. And I had mentioned at this point in the reaction that I interpreted this not necessarily as any direct, immediate change, but more so an alteration of perspective. Now, this is going to be heavily biased because this is how I like to use this sort of recontextualization, is usually narratively to deliver the idea of perspective shifts. But I think that's what I get out of this. Whatever the lyrics were going on about at the beginning that were bittersweet, that was a mix of negative and positive hopefulness and a wanting of more, it's not necessarily that we have more at this point. It's just that we've changed our perspective. What we have now is enough. And I really love that. It's just such a beautiful twist at the end of this song. And for the track to reside in that for such a long time. This isn't a bridge that we enter momentarily before returning back to that more bittersweet side of the song. This is a permanent change to the track. We end the song on this. Technically, we'll get to the true ending in a second, but I absolutely love how we stay in this. I wonder if this was always the plan for the song, or if maybe there was some early draft of it that returned back to the original sound in a more traditional, like A B A B C B pattern, having a variation towards the end of the track to spice things up before returning back to what is familiar. I really like this. I'm glad that the song ended up being this way, regardless of if it was always planned to be. But to me, it absolutely stands out as something that feels like an evolution of sound. It is one of the things that I find I dislike most about the return to the chorus at the end of the track idea that permeates a lot of music, is that sometimes the lyrics are about change and the music just doesn't follow through with that. And I think the music follows through with it here. I really hope the lyrics can line up with anything that I'm talking about here, because the music absolutely tells me a story. I would love to hear followed through and tied together in the lyrical side of things. But I mean, just the sheer concept of recontextualizing an idea is just not something you see too often in pop music, and I absolutely love it here. It was just it was a warm ending. And once I realized what was happening, it put such a stupid smile on my face. The biggest, dumbest grin, because I love that technique. And it was pulled off so effortlessly here. I mean, even just the tempo, taking something that I felt was slower and pushing it into a faster feeling overall. It wasn't like it was a blistering pace. It just felt like a I don't know, a second wind, a little bit of a pick me up. something a little bit more energetic than where we had started. And yet, honestly, I don't think the tempo changed either. I don't think the tempo changed either. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that statement. The inflection was not matching my intentions. um, the like that slower 4/4 feel, you can still find that in the back half of this track. It's just not what's present. It's not what is felt most. Just having that faster 3 pulse dominates the entire feeling. It's very tough to go back to that slower pulse, even though it is still there. Again, I don't think the tempo's been changed at all. It's just a perspective shift. And so this actually brings me to the final 2 seconds of the song, the true ending, when it just sort of abruptly stops and we get a down tuning note. I don't know what to make of that. I'm kind of hoping maybe it has something to do with the lyrics. I keep coming back to the name of the song, Movies. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like the pop culture idea of classic, like real based films. Because the music video was in a film theater. Uh, and maybe coming to the end and, no more. But like, I don't know how that works. It also kind of, to me, feels abrupt. Whatever positivity we were feeling just stops. And usually some sort of down-tuned pitch shift over time, that's very rarely used in a positive light. So maybe there is some sort of danger here, some sort of negativity. Maybe the dark side wins out. I don't know. Maybe it ties together better on the album. Maybe it's a bit of a transition into the next track. Maybe it makes sense within the larger artwork. But as of right now, I found that to be quite interesting, as abrupt as it was, and as much of a emotional shift as it represented, given that I thought the song was pretty much about finding positivity in places where maybe you're not so optimistic. I thought it was beautiful up until that point, and I still think the song is beautiful. I'm very confused about that ending bit. The last thing I want to bring up real quick is just general production on this. It's fantastic. I love the pacing of the first half of the track, the rising and falling layers in the vocals, the harmonies that come through that. Dude, the emotional weight of the harmonic layers in the vocals is so good. How we can have this feeling of loneliness, but then even when we surround ourselves with more voices, it doesn't bring the song up at all. We're just lonely together. Like, yeah, dude, that's awesome. Um, the ways that the instruments are placed and layered throughout this, the use of spaciousness, of actually not just spaciousness like across the x-axis of making sure that we use all this space and not ever feeling too claustrophobic, but also the use of space in general. No point of this song, even towards the end of the track, when we are at our fullest and loudest, no part ever feels like we have filled every single space of the song. It always feels like there's room for a little bit more, which could also be its own metaphorical thing. I don't necessarily know where to take this yet. Hopefully the lyrics will help me kind of fill that in a little bit. But it is something that I picked up on, this feeling that there's always room for more. And I can't really tie that into my emotional read on the music yet, but like I said, it's a pattern I picked up on. Everything sounds great from start to finish, though, and yeah, let's dive into some lyrics here, see what's going on with movies. All right, I've stared at these lyrics a bit longer than I usually look at them, trying to make heads or tails out of it. I think there's a very common, easy to read surface level thing going on here. If we look at chorus 2, it says, "Put me in a movie and everyone will know me. You'll be the star you know you are." The bridge says, I know the meaning, I know the story, I know the glory, and I love movies. The outro says, I want to be in my own movie. I want to be the star of my own movie. This idea of wanting life to be simple and scripted and predetermined, to be the star, for everything to revolve around you, for you to have plot armor, for you to be important, for everyone to know you. I think on two different levels here. The idea of being the main character, but also of being a star. Not just being known within the world of being the most important character in the story, but also outside of that, being the actor, the star themselves, and being important and popular and memorable, being a celebrity in the real world too. A lot of this song focuses on wanting to be remembered, wanting to be important. I find that difficult to juxtapose with the other half of this track then. And we'll get into a second. I have a tough time pairing this to my read of the music entirely. There are parts of it that I think work, but not necessarily in the ways I was expecting them to line up. We'll get to that in a second, though. The first verse says, "This is how it feels to be in love. This is life from above. There's no more books. I'm bound to that summer big box office hit, making love to a counterfeit." I think this is interesting in a sense. I mentioned this sort of bittersweet start to the song. The very first line that comes in is about flying, about seeing life from above everything else, about getting this bird's eye view on stuff. It says that this is how it feels to be in love, to have this larger perspective on things. But this larger perspective seems to be tied to film, and not necessarily any film, but seemingly the big budget action, maybe romance films. It says, I'm bound to that summer big box office hit. We're talking about your car chase. I mean, like, okay, so when I think of a summer hit, I also primarily think of summer action flicks. Your Transformers, your Independence Days, your Marvel films, the stuff that comes out usually around the summertime, usually a very high budget, car chases, action, fighting, that kind of stuff. But is that same cycle also prominent within romance films? I don't know. But I wonder if it matters not. Is this just about the vapid summer hits? The thing about a hit film, as opposed to an art house film, is usually that it needs to have the widest net thrown to be interesting to the most amount of people, and thus its target audience is the lowest common denominator. Usually those films are interesting. Good popcorn flicks might be a fun time, good bit of entertainment, but they're not usually going to have a lot of depth to them. Their purpose isn't to make you think, they're not to challenge you, they're not to create art, they are to create money, to see a very large return of investment. And this opening verse says that they are bound to the summer big box office hit. I don't know if maybe I'm putting my own biases into that, but being bound to the most vapid of art, I find to be a very interesting, complex line. Also, to lead into that by say there's no books anymore. Books can be just as vapid as film. They can be just as entertaining as film. But I do feel like in pop culture, books tend to be a bit more highbrow. Even if the novel itself isn't, it's still stuffier and nerdier to read a book than to watch a film. But again, I could be injecting some biases into this too. My own experiences with these types of media. I'm bound to the big box office hits making love to a counterfeit. Is this talking about how these films aren't real life? As we see later on, this person says that they want to be a star. They want to be the main character in a film. But is this right off the bat an acknowledgement that what happens in film is not what real life is about? That it is fantasy. It's usually escapism, especially your big box office hits. I've spent too long on this opening verse, I feel, but for 6 lines, it packs a much larger punch than it seems to on first glance. The first chorus simply says, "Why did so many get a rise out of me? I love the movies." These feel like two totally different ideas. One is that this person was picked on or annoyed or bullied, and says, why? Why did that happen so frequently? And then, I love the movies. I don't really see the segue there other than, as I mentioned, escapism. My life wasn't great. People tried to annoy me all the time. Why did they always do that? I escaped to the movies. Life made more sense in the films. Verse 2, some people feel what some people don't. I love that line. I don't know what I don't know what WEYES Blood was initially aiming for, what their artistic intent is with that line, but what I get out of it is that some people are more empathetic than others. I love that line. Some people feel what some people don't. Even the repetition. Some people want, some people want. I love that. It's simple but effective. It says some people watch until they explode. The meaning of life doesn't seem to shine like that screen. This, of course, being the silver screen, being films. Life makes more sense in the films. This just kind of continues on with some of that. Now we come back to chorus 2. Put me in a movie and everyone will know me. You'll be the star that you know you are. We've already kind of talked about those lines. But then it says, the movies I watched when I was a kid, the hopes and the dreams don't give credit to the real things. I love the movies. This is interesting. This is fascinating. So it talks about how what happens in films, whether it's, you know, life experience or writing credits or where ideas came from. We don't give credit to the real things. It might be inspired by a real life event. You don't always have to say that though, do you? And it could just be small things too. How many films, how many books have been written that are based on a bunch of vignettes in someone's life, things that they've seen in real life, and they just happen to string it together now into a story, making up a few things as they go. No credit given to what those real events were. Despite this, though, the narrator loves the movies. And this brings me back to the opening line. This is how it feels to be in love. I had originally assumed this was a romantic love between two people, but I don't think it is anymore. I think it is the unconditional love for a broken medium. Absolutely falling head over heels for cinema, for film, for movies in general. All of what it represents, all the positivity and hopefulness and optimism, while still understanding that it isn't everything it seems. Movies are not real life. The optimism in film usually isn't present in real life. The simple endings and the ways that three arcs can wrap up any story. Or I guess any story can be wrapped up into three arcs. Even the creation process of films is a bit grimy and slimy, not perfect and pristine either, and yet the narrator loves film nonetheless. I think that's beautiful. To see the blemishes, understand the blemishes, not push them to the side and forget about them, not sweep them under the rug, but to still love something regardless. I think that speaks a lot to the power of movies. And I'm kind of curious if this is a generational thing. Not to deviate too far from this, I don't know how old Wise Blood is, so I can't make any inference there. But movies don't seem to have the same hold as I feel they did with my generation, millennials and older. I feel like that golden age is sort of done and over with, and film is full of cynicism now. I just don't see the Zoomers and the Alphas being as head over heels about cinema as older generations. And it puts an interesting time capsule on this track. To me, at least, it feels like it represents a time when Hollywood was this land of hopes and dreams. Anything can happen. The films that you see are larger than life, and they embody so much hope and optimism for the future. I don't even necessarily know if I feel that way anymore, but I do know that I felt that way at one point in my life. And I think this is a phenomenal love song towards what film can be and what film has been in the past as a medium, as a career path, as any of that. But it does bring something interesting to the music. I talked about the music to me being something bittersweet, having hope and optimism for something even if you feel like it's beyond your grasp. I think this idea of seeing the films and wanting your life to be like that is a good analogy. It's a good parallel to the vast arpeggiation of the synths with these sort of drearier melody lines on top of that, where the synth represents the simple life of storytelling and how anyone can be a star and the main character and everything looks glittery and perfect up on the silver screen, but that your life isn't that and you really want it to be. You have this longing to be the main character of a story. That's the vocals. So then the bridge and the outro, which simply state that I want to be in my own movie, I want to be the star of my own movie. This is the musical twist. This is the shift in perspective. I don't really see a shift in perspective. To me, this feels in one of two ways. It's either manifest destiny by simply stating, I want to be in my own movie. It is a way of trying to manifest these plans into reality, to become the main character in your story. But I can also feel a bit of delusional thinking here. And I think the music kind of backs this up a little bit too, where our narrator falls into this realm of fantasy, no different than the movies themselves. the music shifts towards something positive. They are the main character now. All of their dreams have come true, but there's also the at the end of the track that sort of implies none of that actually ever happened. The plug has been pulled on this dream because that's all it ever was, a dream. It was never made into reality. The outro never states that I will be a star. It never states that I am now a star. All it ever says is I want, which follows along with a lot of the longing that we had in the first half of the track musically. That schism between the longing of the lyrics here and the optimism and warmth of the music is something I'm having a tough time reconciling. I really want to believe it in that delusional mindset, but I don't necessarily know if that was the artistic intent on it. So now I'm kind of curious if Weyes Blood has ever done an interview specifically about this song. Send me a link to that. I would love to know what their authorial intent is here. I thought I had a pretty strong read on the music, and I still stand by my interpretation of what's going on musically, but it doesn't necessarily line up in a way with the lyrics that I think supports it. However, I've now talked over 35 minutes about a 6-minute song, so let's wrap this up. This has obviously captured my imagination, and I'll probably be returning to this track in the future on my own, trying to figure it out. It feels like a puzzle. It's simple yet complex and deep, and that is what I love in art. Stuff that sort of walks that fine line in the middle of accessibility and complexity. Kind of enthralled by it at the moment. These are my thoughts, though, my preliminary thoughts, I believe, on Weyes Blood movies. What did you think, though? Did you enjoy this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on if I made some mistakes? Maybe you have your own thoughts and interpretations on this track. Please put all of that down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.